All right, everyone, it's time to react to the Project Veritas release the other day. James O'Keefe exposing one of Bernie Sanders' mid-level campaign workers. Now, the level of disinfo in the first couple of hours of this release from the Sanders fans was palpable, and it was very cute watching them try to run themselves in circles like some real mental gymnastics to cover for the campaign. Let me first, though, give them a little bit of rope here, and not even to hang themselves with. Bernie Sanders is not individually responsible for this particular individual. I'm not even going to use his name. You can go to the release and see it, but it's not doxing, but YouTube is more draconian these days. One of his campaign members in Iowa was caught on video saying all sorts of weird stuff like, we're going to beat cops in the streets, Milwaukee will burn if Sanders doesn't become nominee. We should take, media people who don't like Sanders out and like beat him in the streets or light him on fire. I can't remember what he said. And just stuff like gulags weren't that bad. The normal thing you'd get from like a tankie, from one of the less educated, well, I mean, that's redundant, so never mind, from a communist. And the thing is this. Here's my takeaway. Individually, this individual himself as one person is not necessarily evidence of anything larger in the campaign. The problem is this. This shows that Bernie Sanders' campaign can attract this sort of person because his rhetoric is at least tolerable to people who have that sort of thing in mind. Now, I know what you might be saying. Well, they said the same thing about Trump. The corporate media said he attracted Nazis. Absolutely. And what happened when those claims were made? People dogpiled the Trump campaign. People looked at a handful of people who were genuinely despicable within the Trump campaign, some of which got fired, some of which were just fans or whatever, had to be disavowed, like a David Duke sort of thing. And they extrapolated that to be the larger fan base of Trump. They went after people like me as well for defending or supporting Trump on the basis that, well, here's their logic. Their logic was Trump attracts a few Nazis. Therefore, Trump is Nazi-friendly. Therefore, backers of Trump are Nazi-adjacent. I would love to see the same fanatical view of Bernie Sanders. I would love to see the same thing from the corporate media. Instead, it's a wasteland. Nobody's even talking about it. Now, part of this is, of course, because it was right before the debate. Now, I question whether the timing necessarily was actually good. I think the idea was to throw a wrench in him before the debate and see if this would get taken as a question. That was never going to happen. The problem is this, and here's a warning for O'Keefe. Here's a little bit of advice. I know he's a strategic person, so he doesn't generally need it, but I'm going to put my 2 cents in anyway. The Democrats are perfectly willing to entertain screwing Bernie Sanders. We saw this in 2016. If your goal is to stop communism or far leftism by stopping Bernie, and I applaud that because I don't want to see, a Vermonter get held up as the standard of my state who happens to be a fucking fanatic and a loser. That's fine. The problem is that they're afraid of him. They're afraid of screwing his fans and ending up with 2016 again, which is that the neoliberal candidate won't get through and Trump gets reelected widely because they fucked Bernie Sanders and his youth revolution. They need his voters. So they're going to softball him. Keep that in mind. Don't try to use the DNC zone machinations against Bernie Sanders because they're going to be very, very reluctant to do so. They'll go through a third party. They'll have some third party corporate media firm attack him. By the way, there's literally one thing said by this individual on this tape that actually not only is true, but I agree with, which is that the corporate media are full of snakes and hacks. I don't believe in causing harm to them, but as Bernie Sanders, mid-level staffer in Iowa here does, but they are snakes. Yeah, of course they're dishonest. Of course, they've been treating Bernie Sanders with kid gloves. Can I just say something to the Bernie bros again? Let me reiterate this. Bernie Sanders a few weeks ago was supporting a vape ban. And when Trump did this, everybody and their mother jumped down his throat saying he's out of touch and insane. This is authoritarian. It's a terrible idea. By the way, they were right. It is authoritarian. It is a bad idea. Only Politico reported on it. They were the only mainline group that reported on this goddamn story when it was Bernie Sanders. He then retracts it, walks it back the next day. I'm sorry, but Bernie Sanders gets extremely deferential treatment because his fans are so vicious that any mild criticism of him results in deplatforming raids, if it's a private content creator, attempted boycotts, non-stop harassment. So while this isn't necessarily a symbol of a wider problem within the campaign, it is a problem within the campaign. Bernie Sanders will never be pressured to disavow this individual. Now, the spin thereafter was also concerning. This was a mid-level staffer, a mid-level organizer in Iowa. This is the first state to vote. It's an important state. That's a fairly important position. Immediately after this Veritas release, his account went down. A bunch of other Iowa Bernie officials' accounts went silent. They got locked on Twitter and elsewhere. Things got scrubbed. It was very funny because actually O'Keefe tweeted out a picture beforehand. It was like a Stalin comparison. You know how Stalin used to have people airbrushed out of the news? Famously, people he had killed or he didn't like anymore, they got exiled or turned traitor or whatever. Comparing that to this, and that's actually what happened, which is that the Bernie bros attempted to disappear any mention of him. One claim was that he was just a lowly volunteer. Wasn't. He was on the payroll. He was actually a paid manager. He was a campaign, a field manager. Not the big honcho in Iowa, but locally and regionally, yeah, had some clout. And this is the sort of person that Bernie Sanders employs. Where's going to be the outrage from the corporate media and also from creators? These creators who would dogpile Donald Trump. Oh my God, he had this manager here. And I mean, Donald Trump gets endorsed by someone with off-color views. He's expected to immediately disavow. Bernie Sanders is employing a literal communist who's got, by the way, a criminal history fairly recently. Mostly minor charges that shouldn't be crimes, like drug paraphernalia, who cares? Stuff like DUI, which is like more of a character trait. Okay, he's scummy, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's a terrible, violent person. But he's saying violent shit. Others were trying to say, oh, well, they got him liquored up. He's just a drunk mouthing off dude. Again, for the most part, when people get inebriated, they don't start talking about committing assassinations and talking about killing people. Can you imagine? Can I ask this? Can you imagine if a Trump field organizer got liquored up, they give him a few too many Bud Lights, and they get him on camera saying, yeah, the fucking corporate media, they hate Trump, we should drag him out in the streets and burn them to death. Can you goddamn fucking imagine the wall-to-wall media coverage you'd get? It'd be front page in every goddamn single newspaper. It'd be on Right Wing Watch. It'd be in Vox. It'd be on Salon. CNN would have 5 stories about attacks on the First Amendment and how Trump's fans hate the corporate media and how Trump was uniquely responsible for the whole thing. His rhetoric is violent and antagonistic and responsible for attacks on journalism and journalists. That's the story of the day. We've seen it before. We've seen it when anyone who supports Trump does anything wrong, Trump is faulted for it. Where's the CNN story saying Bernie Sanders is despicable and is whipping his fans up into a frenzy against the corporate media? Hey, look, here's one of his field managers in Iowa, of all places, talking about taking us out and burning us to death. Where's the wall-to-wall coverage? The Sanders fans are delusional if they think that he is being mistreated by the media. Largely, until the last 48 hours, he's been ignored by them. You know why? Because he's not viable. He's not capable of beating Trump. That's the fucking sad truth of it, Bernie bros. He's not mistreated by the media. He's dismissed by the media. Trump is mistreated by the media. Independent content creators, regardless of our political views. The only people associated with Bernie that are being abused are Bernie fans who have a YouTube channel or an Instagram page. You're being abused. Bernie Sanders isn't. You're his mouthpiece. You do it for free. How very funny. Meanwhile, his field managers talk about literal violent revolution and try to say the gulags actually had a working wage and like a livable wage and universal education and healthcare. What are you fucking talking about? And it is funny, and I'll say another thing. I don't like to judge people by the company they keep because, it's sort of what the corporate media does. But I do notice that it seems like every other American, at least, with a hammer and sickle on their Twitter page, is a Bernie bro. I find that very interesting because supposedly liberals get the bullet too, and Sanders is bourgeois, and he's actually a capitalist. He's not even really a socialist. Well, then why does he have so many supporters among the self-proclaimed Marxist crowd? Very funny. Because when Trump has a few supporters who say that they're nationalistic, even if it's not ethno-nationalism, he's considered to be like the next Goebbels or Hitler or something. Well, I mean, this is a little bit of a non-equivalent situation. The coverage is different, the opinions are different, the hypocrisy is astounding. That's my big takeaway, is the hypocrisy involved among some of Bernie Sanders fans, but even more, the eternal enemy of all truth and justice and righteousness in the world, the corporate media. Corporate media complex is easily the worst of all groups of people, I think, in the fucking world. They don't even have to be the ones pressing the trigger. They're the ones gleefully talking about it and making money off the fact that it was pulled. Bunch of snakes. So that's the one thing that I would definitely agree with that dude on. Yeah, the legacy media is terrible, absolutely. But taking them out and burning them in the streets, yeah, again, can you imagine if a Trump fan said that? Oh, you can just imagine the coverage. It'd last for weeks. You'd never hear the end of it. That's about all. Peace out.